Hello and welcome to today's ExecuNet interview. And before I introduce our guest, I just wanted to say that we're glad that you're here and just to reflect on the fact that ExecuNet's been working with executives to enable successful transitions, which is, of course, at the heart of every executive search for about 33 years now. I've been able to be here and be a part of this for 11 years. And early on in my tenure, I had the pleasure of working with Drew Hartigan, who's here with us today. And Drew's continuously offered to share his insights and his wisdom. And his transition was particularly challenging, a bigger transition than many, because after 27 illustrious years serving as a Navy officer, he decided to make a transition. And we can sort of laugh about it now, but looking back early on when we were talking about 10 years ago, Drew was pretty adamant about wanting to leave the defense industry and try something new. And, I'm going to give you a spoiler alert here. We're 10 years later and 4 companies later in Drew's career. All of those transitions have been successful. And today he's firmly entrenched in, guess what, the defense industry, but has great lessons learned and great wisdom to share. And knowing Drew, as I've come to know him over the past 10 years off and on, that story will focus on leadership and relationships and communication. So let me introduce you to Drew Hartigan. Drew, can you just give us a little snippet about what you're doing today?
Yeah, well, thanks first, Erica, for having me. My role today is there's a company called Innovative Defense Technologies, and they are bringing automation and software testing to the defense industry. And if I wrap this up for many people when they ask what we do, if you look at Tesla and Amazon and Google and how they deploy software, fix things that are broken, and deploy it once it's been repaired and tested, they do this in a matter of minutes on occasion, sometimes days. And the U.S. Department of Defense still takes 2 to 4 years to upgrade something in the software domain and deploy it. So I think what my company is doing is bringing current modern day commercial software testing and deployment to the Defense Department, and they're an organization who needs it because they're still entrenched in the way they've been doing business successfully for decades, and it's an organization that's reluctant to change. So that's what I'm doing today, Erica. That the background that may be useful for some people to know is I spent of my 27 years in the Navy, 17 was flying airplanes, and then 10 of it was in the acquisition business. So I was buying and contracting and delivering capability that the Navy needed to use. So I became familiar with that business or acquisition world.
Hey, thank you for that. And let's go back to that really interesting point of first being adamant that you wanted to leave the defense industry. And, we all know now that you remained in the defense industry. So why did you come back to defense, and what was it that the commercial world found interesting about your defense years?
Well, I didn't dislike defense at all. Matter of fact, I enjoyed it, but I just felt like, life is short and it's time to go explore other alternatives. And I was very interested in particular, the energy industry, which I thought was transitioning. And I interviewed with an energy company. I interviewed with a pharmaceutical company. And what I learned was I didn't have much to offer them. As you grow and become a leader and a manager and a business person within the Navy, much of your value is really in the organization and the domain that you've come to know. So I learned that while they were mildly interested in somebody with Navy experience, other industries couldn't translate that into bottom line revenue value as much as a defense company can. And what the companies who did want, in the defense industry wanted retired Navy guys for is that we just, the language, the context, you can talk about mission, you can talk about acquisition, you can talk about the people and the challenges and the difficulties. And really, it's a different world. It's a different, when it comes to the ability to help a company generate revenue, knowing the domain that they are working in matters a great deal. And I think I underestimated how much domain understanding mattered to the people who were retiring naval officers.
That's actually really insightful, and I think it's going to be really helpful for others who are, making the transition and might be curious as you were about, what else can I do and where else can I apply these skills, and how needed you really are in other arenas that have, a defense at the heart of what they're doing. What would you say is the biggest leap you needed to make? And not only in terms of business, but in terms of how did you personally need to change?
I think the biggest leap is understanding what money means in the two different worlds. And so, people, there are leaders inside the Department of Defense that manage pretty big budgets. You get up to the senior levels and you're usually managing budgets that begin in the billions. And that money is important. And we come to think that matters very much. The more that you're managing, the more that it matters. But the truth of it is that it's government money that's being budgeted so that you can execute programs. But that the people that are doing the work, those people are going to have their job the next month, whether you excel at that work or whether you make a catastrophic mistake and fail. And the people that are doing the work inside the government retain their jobs and retain their normal workflow if you as a leader succeed or if you as a leader fail. Whereas you step across the street to the industry side, and now the people that work for you and the budgets that you have, if you don't succeed, those people go home. If you don't, those, even though the budget amounts may be similar, the difference between success and failure when you're on the industry side is that, the people are dependent upon those revenue dollars. Their jobs are dependent upon it, their families, their plans, their mortgage payments, and success matters more. And I don't mean to undermine how important success is in the Defense Department, but the binary difference between a contract being awarded or not being awarded is just felt much deeper on the industry side than it is in the government side. And I think that was the thing I needed to learn first, and I didn't really appreciate it as much as I probably should have. That's one of the things I wish I knew while I was still in uniform. But that's the biggest difference, and it doesn't take too long to learn that. It doesn't take too long to learn that at all, because it just becomes obvious once you're dealing with the people that are delivering in the industry side.
Did you feel like that was a heavier burden on you?
I don't think I ever took anything unseriously in the Defense Department, but it was a more real burden. The reality of, if I don't get this right in the government, I probably ought to be fired. I mean, they probably ought to replace me because I didn't get it right. And there's some measure of accountability that, we deserve if we don't succeed. But on the other side, if I don't get this right, not only maybe should I be fired, but a lot of my people will lose their work. It just becomes more real and more impactful. And I think that's meaningful and probably worth learning fast.
And I think also there's, a lot of a lot of the faces that you're talking about. You have interactions with them. You know who's having their first child. You know who's dealing with a parent with Alzheimer's, right? I mean, you know the exact impact losing their jobs may have on them and a wider number of people.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's exactly right. And it does become more important, I think, to know the people that are working, to know the people that are doing the meaningful work and getting the job done and delivering the contracts and delivering the value. I think that matters a lot, because that's really how the people will perform at their best. If they know they're being valued, and they know they're understood, and they know how they're contributing meaningfully to the organization, it matters more. It's more tangible when you're working in the industry side, I think, than the government side, because the government machine, it'll roll on with or without you, success or failure. The whole machine just keeps moving.
Right, right. I used to, early in my own career, I worked for the federal government in the executive branch, and I was amazed to upfront witness the change in leadership when there was an election. Even though the same president was reelected when I was there, all of the leaders in the organization changed, and it was as if it had a momentum of its own, and it was going to go on no matter what was happening.
That's exactly right. And I don't think you realize that when you're inside. I didn't.
Mhm.
To me, it was, every job was important, every task was important, but I didn't realize how relatively insignificant some of the jobs were, because the machine would just continue to move on,
Mhm.
success or failure, with or without you.
So how is it that you actually built traction in the private sector when you were on this journey?
Yeah, there's another skill that I had to learn to build traction, and that was really seeing things through my customers' eyes. And now my customers are the people that I used to be, the people who
Right.
were in uniform in the government, trying to deliver product and needing support. And 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 it took a little while to be able to change my view and be able to support from the outside, as if I was still there. I wanted to become the organization that I wish I had supporting me when I was still in the Navy.
It's a great
And
perspective.
yeah, and it didn't come overnight, Erica. It really didn't. I started, I think, with an expectation that, of course, they're going to want to buy this because this is so good. I mean,
Mhm.
I knew that what I was offering in a couple of different companies was so good that, of course, they would want to buy that. But I think I underestimated the organization's resistance to change, and the organization's intransigence, because of they're just so, the machine is moving with the way they've always done business. And I had to reset my worldview on how they look at change coming into their organization. I always embraced change when I was in the government, but I didn't realize I was an anomaly until I was out for 3 or 4 years, and discovered that I was kind of an anomaly. And most of the government organizations just naturally resist change, because they've just been doing it this way for so long.
Mhm. And, stating the obvious here, it's not just the military organizations that are like that. Many organizations and even silos within organizations are like that. And
Yeah,
it's something that we have to continuously address.
yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's a continuous battle. And the challenge is finding the people who do understand the value of change and want to embrace it. And then still, even when the executive leadership understands change, getting the middle managers to understand the change that their executives perceive, is still a long, fist fight. It goes on for years and years and years.
Yeah, large scale change is fascinating and takes a lot of muscle.
I have a fun story, if I could take a minute.
Yeah,
There's a
sure.
there's a world leader in change, and his name is John Cotter, and he's a professor at Harvard. He's written 6 or 8 books. He's brilliant. He's a leader. And I actually had the opportunity to hire John when I was in the Navy to help affect change within the Navy. And he spent a couple of months exploring with some of his top guys how I thought we could apply change inside the Navy. And after 2 months, when it came time to introduce him to the executive level at the 3-star, the guy who would write the check, he said, with some deliberation, maybe he thought about it for a day, and he came back and he said, Drew, your organization is not ready for change. I'd love to do this work, but I don't think it will be successful. And he bowed out of doing really meaningful work because he had enough experience to know the Navy wasn't ready. And that was about 2010. So maybe they're more ready today.
Yeah. And of course, my first foray into large scale change was in a defense aerospace company. And even though the executive team was very much on board and was pushing it and was selling it and was involved on a daily basis, it still took us, a considerable effort day after day and showing results until we could get the naysayers on board. And one of the things that really helped was the wonderful leadership team that we had. And in particular, the president of the organization, who said to the entire audience of the entire organization, we're going to give you time to get on board. But if at some point you're not on the bus, you're no longer here. So the criticality of actually getting on the bus, there was no bones made about it. And that helped. And then the other thing that we did, and you probably have stories like this too, was we identified some of the formal and informal leaders in the organization who were, particularly those who were naysayers, and gave them a role in the change. Because once you have a role in it and you have to teach it and you have to make it happen, your transition is, I think, facilitated.
Right. I have found that to communicate change to that middle management and senior management layer, you have to let them know how it's going to be beneficial to them. Mm-hmm. It's no good and doesn't get anywhere if you tell them how it's going to be beneficial to their organization, but how is it going to be beneficial to them personally in doing their job?
They have to put the suit on. Yep. So let me get back to your transition for a moment here and ask you, you've not just made that one transition initially successful, but others after that. So I have to assume that your objectives changed during that time. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, although I don't know that they changed dramatically, it was more gradual, but I discovered after I retired that one of the things I really appreciated about the Navy was I was always growing into new roles, and that just becomes natural from being a young officer to a senior officer. You're always asked to take new roles, and that's the way they grow people. But I always learned. Every job was a learning opportunity, and that was one of the greatest things about the Navy. And what I realized post Navy was that I just wanted to continue to do the same thing. And learning isn't just changing from one job to another within a company. In many cases, it is going from one company to the next company to learn a different aspect of the industry or a different part of or a different way of doing business altogether. So I think each time that I rotated, I was seeking more and different learning to just build skills and understanding of how the whole machine worked. And I've enjoyed that. And now I'm in a position where I think I'm learning, my learning curve is so steep in the job that I'm in. I don't think I have to leave to continue learning. But the learning is forced upon me because, at the cutting edge of innovation, it becomes necessary to learn to survive.
It's relentless. It really is continuous.
Yeah.
And so looking back on both halves of your career, or both chunks of your career, I know it's not an even number of years. What do you most cherish about your time in the Navy? And what would you say the same is for your time in the private sector?
You know, the Navy was, gosh, for any young person who asked me about joining the Navy, I'm pretty strong supporter of the idea, because the learning is so steep, and the accountability and the responsibility that you get as a youngster are extraordinary. Right? There's nobody that will trust you to fly, nobody outside of a military that will trust you to fly a 40, 50 or $70 million airplane, and, you know, without lots and lots and lots and lots of experience and proof that you're responsible for it. You know, the Navy does that, you know, right out of the gate. You're a 25-year-old flying a $40 million airplane. And that's, to me, that's extraordinary.
Mhm.
The growth in leadership is also, it's not only forced, but there's a requirement to respond. You have to deliver inside the Navy, because there's people that count on you, and there's missions that count on you. So I valued that. I loved learning to think at the speed of a fighter airplane. You know, you had to think fast, and I liked being forced to learn that. You had to do that. But I think I enjoy the leadership development outside of the Navy more than I did inside of the Navy, because leadership's very different in the commercial sector. Because in the military, when somebody asks you to do something, your first answer was yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, and then you might have gone and thought about it, right? In the commercial world, people don't do that, right? I mean, if you want to give guidance and direction as a leader in the commercial world, you have to be giving that with an understanding that the people are really, they are going to dissect what you say and do it if they believe it, not do it because you say it. And that's a very different world. And I think that leadership journey outside of the Navy, of understanding how to effectively communicate and how to build relationships and how to lead, not by direction, but by influence, by support, by creating an environment, it's just very different. And that leadership journey has been, to me, extraordinary, and more so on the commercial side than it was inside of the Navy.
Mhm. Well said. Very interesting. So I guess it is, in closing, how can we sum this up in terms of the wisdom that you would offer someone who's just about to make the transition, that initial transition from a military assignment to a commercial?
Do we have another 30 minutes for this question, Eric?
We do, if you want to.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'll go back to one of the first things that you and I discussed when we first did transition coaching, in 2012. And you forced me to tell my own story, right? And I wasn't quite comfortable with that, and nor did I understand the value or the importance of it. But if I offered a single piece of wisdom in what you are transitioning to, is that you go and do what fits you as an individual, right? Because we all have different things that we care about. We all have different things that motivate us. We all have different things that we want to leave behind. And if you go and you take a job because it's got some lofty title or a sexy sounding, position, that's not it, right? I mean, maybe it takes a couple of tries, but you have to find that place that connects to your purpose and your desire to wake up every day and give it the best that you have. And I think that is a lesson learned that I see. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have found that in my current role. And I believe that every morning I'm doing something that's meaningful, both for me and for my customers. but I think people miss that. And I think they go to jobs because, vice president sounds good, or they really want to be in, Milwaukee or wherever they want to be. And they miss that connection between their own personal journey, their own personal narrative, and their own personal purpose in the position they're going to. So that would be a piece of wisdom that I think maybe I didn't understand initially, and I discovered along the way. And I would encourage everybody who's transitioning to seek that.
I would definitely underscore that, because we have the pleasure of working with successful executives day after day. And I would say nearly to a person, what they're looking for, what each of these individuals is looking for, is more fulfillment.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
And so that's wonderful advice. Anything else that you'd like to add before we close for the day?
If I were to wrap up one other thing that I have learned way more in the commercial side than in the Navy, is that the relationships with the people that you engage with matter deeply.
Mhm.
And it's not just for outcomes, and it's not just for successes, it's for the long haul, right? So I have discovered and appreciated the value of not only earning those relationships, but building them. And I think that matters a lot. And maybe that's just something that comes with age and experience, rather than out or inside of the Defense Department. But it's the relationships that matter, and it's the position or the purpose that matters, and everything else really does become secondary.
And the only thing I would say about that is, on a cumulative level, that's culture, right? It's all those relationships boil up to the culture of the organization. And that's the other thing everyone's looking for, is the right culture fit.
Yeah. And so culture, in a word, from my own point of view, is if you can be authentic, if you can be your authentic self in every interaction, in every engagement with internal and external customers, or internal people and external customers, and really be yourself, delivering your own personal purpose in a company whose purpose marries up with yours, then you're in the right culture. And that culture is not easy to identify from the outside looking in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We could talk about that for hours too.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe we'll have to have part 2.
Or 2. All right, I'll be ready.
Thank you so much. This was incredibly insightful and enlightening, and I look forward to continuing our discussions.